Ah, France, the big blue blob, the center of action in Europe. A once unstoppable power is now at odds with everyone in Europe, so let's show them France's power by dismantling all the great powers in Europe. Starting somewhat okay in 1936 as a member of the victorious Entente from the Great War, it finally had its revenge on the Germans after the humiliating defeat in the Franco-Prussian War. France got a lot from the war, to even getting concessions in the Rhineland, especially Saarland. Everything is mostly stable thanks to the National Bloc, but that soon is about to change. Immediately after the game starts, a problem 3 years in the making appears as funds from the national budget are missing completely, with no one knowing where they are going. Seeing this phenomenon, a full-scale investigation has been launched. The initial report not bearing any fruit, it's time to investigate the armed forces and the capitalists. The investigation of the capitalists found nothing new and even pissed them off, so we need to continue the investigation. The armed forces, another big suspect in all of this, must be searched. And a new lead has been found, with many officers sending the funds to offshore accounts, and it has been found that they have been collaborating with many ministers of the country. With this newfound information, it's time we investigate the government as a whole to see if they are responsible for this. The investigation of the army also revealed a large web of corruption inside the armed forces, so it's time to cleanse the armed forces and purge them all of these individuals. Let's just hope the Germans don't get up to doing anything for the moment. And to conclude the investigation, appears that part of the funds were being funneled into Switzerland to personal accounts. This has left the government in a pretty bad position as a whole. With this also becoming public, there is only one thing to do: we need to organize a trial. So it's time we hold the trial of our very own government. With the final jury has appeared with the conclusion all 11 ministers have been found guilty. This has left the National Bloc dumbfounded with the scandal, to the point that the remaining ministers have decided to disband the National Bloc altogether. And now the purge of the armed forces will begin, with its first phase leaving the command structure completely disorganized and unprepared if a war was to break out. But we can't forget that the 1936 elections are here, so who will win the most important election? The Democrats? The Socialists? Or maybe another party? Well, it appears no one has won, as the military has decided to step in after the scandal and have stormed Paris. Oh, and would you look at that? The London stock market has just crashed. Yeah, this is not a great year for France. With the arrival of Black Wednesday, the economy has completely tanked. Add this to the whole scandal of the government, we are in for a wild ride. But those scheming Germans have taken up the opportunity to renounce the Versailles Treaty and declare it dead. So to combat the economic crash, instead of having to go through a focus tree like you normally do in like this type of mods, you instead have a bunch of decisions to deal with Black Wednesday, and for once I kinda like the way it's implemented, as it allows you to continue to focus on other stuff in the focus tree instead of dealing with an economic depression. But thanks to all of this, order in the Rhine has completely collapsed, and with the fear that the Balkist elements could take over the Rhine, the French military has been authorized to take control and restore order. But finally, we have some good news, as new talented military minds are appearing and joining the High Command, helping us deal with the shortage of capable officers thanks to the purges. Talking about the military, a new report /study from the Great War has come out detailing how armored and combined warfare could be the next step in wars to come. But there were also some issues that could come up adopting this type of warfare. Either way, we will keep this in mind, as it may become useful in the future. But at this point I had been going down the focus tree to get rid of the awful debuff of Memories of Verdun, but I actually kinda messed up and did the wrong part of the focus tree, and because I would not have enough time to get rid of the debuff before the war with Germany, well, after restarting the game, and since I now have a military government, we can actually do some offensive measures like invade Luxembourg. Wait, I can't say that. It's a friendly incursion to secure France from a future German invasion, yeah. But we are not the only ones suffering from major problems, as now Italy is dealing with a civil war, and in retrospect I should have left them to deal with that themselves, but oh well. I helped out the Kingdom of Italy to win the war against the Balkists, as we don't really like those guys. And finally, we can get rid of that pesky debuff and finally restart our rearmament to fight the Germans in the upcoming conflict that will decide the future of the continent. And hey, the economy is back on track to being stable again, so overall we are fixing this mess one step at a time. But now it's time to decide our warfare doctrine. We could stick to a defensive one just like the one used in the Great War, or we could modernize and fully embrace the combined arms. I think the option is clear, we are taking a risk, but we will trust in the new era of warfare. Things continue to get better as the economy has been fixed and the military purges are now at an end. But some bad news have come out as Italy has decided to leave the Entente even after we helped them in their civil war, and Germany has decided to push for a heavy foreign policy, meaning that in any moment they could strike. But hey, finally we have our tanks in production and our army was reorganized completely, and we are now ready for the Germans. Although things continue to escalate as nationalist sentiments grow in Corsica, so we'll have to keep an eye out for that. Pesky Italians. And hey, since the world's going to shit, we might as well do something, like getting a border strip in Spain for defensive reasons, of course, totally. But the moment we were all expecting has come as Bohemia, a member of the Entente, is asking for help against the Germans as they are being pressured by the Balkists to give up the Sudetenland. We cannot let this happen. We shall support our friends in the times of need. Also because we know what happens when you give up the Sudetenland to the Germans. Right, Neville?
12 seconds later.
But the Germans refusing a no for an answer, they have declared war on Czechia. As such, it's time we honor our commitment and support our friends. At first, we managed to cross the German border and made some headway, but after Czechia capitulated, we were forced back to go to our starting positions, and into a stalemate we went. So, to better prepare and have an upper hand when the Germans eventually cross the Rhine, we shall demand Wallonia from the Belgians. Although this backfired tremendously as the shitty British have decided to get involved, and since we already have our hands full with the Germans, we can't risk war with them for now. But in turn, this actually turned out in my favor as the Belgians joined the Imperial Alliance of the British, and Germany would eventually go to war with Belgium to get through France, just like they did in the Great War, meaning I had a trap set up for the Germans. And since we are at war with Germans proper, it's time we start designing our mechanized forces and reform the last parts of French High Command as the battle for France is about to begin. At this point, I called the Rhineland into the war since the Germans were just standing still, so this way they would be forced to cross over to Belgium and spring my trap. I just like taking candy from a baby, it worked, so now Britain was at war with Germany, as well as treacherous Italians as they joined the British. But interestingly enough, even after I demanded half their country, the Belgians wanted to backstab the British and join us, so I said, why not? This, at the end of the day, would piss off the British, so this would be perfect. As you could imagine, Belgium stood no chance against the German horde, but we were ready to defend every last inch of France if necessary. Unfortunately, the Germans did manage to cross over to France in certain spots in the front line, but thankfully our tank divisions were ready to be deployed, and as such, not only did they regain French territory, but they even managed to cross over into Belgium and liberate certain spots, and this all thanks to my vastly overproduced air force. So quick reminder to everyone to spam out fires and casts as they really help out in the wars. The offensive to retake Belgium restarted, and with the Air Force doing a fantastic job helping out the ground troops that recaptured major cities like Brussels. With their head bashing against my lines, the Germans had suffered 2 million casualties, meanwhile only 10% of that died in the French side. The offensive continued, the armored spearhead managed to even break into the Netherlands, where basically most of the lowlands were liberated from the Germans and the Dutch traders. But now it was time to encroach into German territory as we liberated parts of the Rhineland, and we even managed to push into Germany proper, encircling some troops in Essen. Oh, and the German casualties were just getting worse, as now 5 million died as we continued our offensive, but now I was looking for a juicier pocket, one that could completely change the tide of the war. As we pushed into Frankfurt and taking it, left a big pocket ready to be encircled in Luxembourg and the Saarland, so with the help of the divisions in Alsace, we closed that pocket easily, cutting off 50 divisions or so. Those divisions were crushed, and the German casualties just jumped to 6 million just from that one pocket alone. This left Germany to push and conscript every single combat-able man in the country, and this would be the turning point that would lead Germany to doom itself. Germany was now broken, lacking enough men to field and defend their country, and now it was time we take the offensive and do not stop until we reach Berlin and until those Germans are fully defeated. Berlin fell to our armies, and once again, just like in the First Great War, we showed them to not mess with France, and now it was time to celebrate. The only thing was that the High Command was not informed in time that Berlin was already ours and ordered it to take it before the end of the month. So yeah, kinda late, but what can we say? We might have super advanced tanks, but we don't have basic radios to contact High Command. German casualties reached 7 million before the end of the war, while ours did not even reach the 500,000 mark. The Germans were pushed all the way to East Prussia, and only then did they decide to finally surrender, with 8 million Germans dead. The world map was redrawn as a whole. Italy got Austria, Hungary, Slovakia, while the British took parts of Scandinavia, since that's the only thing they did in the war. Meanwhile, I took the rest with the Rhine growing in size, and since Germany could no longer be trusted to maintain peace in the world, it was time that we dismantle it, and later this would begin a trend of dismantling everyone in Europe, but that's a bit of a spoiler. But even after the world has suffered a second Great War, it cannot stay in peace as the shitty Italians have begun justifying in one of our colonies. Well, if they want war, we will give them war. But another conflict started in the Caucasus as the Caucasus invaded my Turkish puppet that I took in a peace deal, but I really could not send any help as I was preparing for the war with the Brits and the Italians. And with the justification complete, it was time to end the treacherous Italians and Albion at once. The Italians were no match for the great French army, and they soon collapsed on all fronts, from Austria, Slovakia to Italy proper, and as they did not even put any resistance, as they soon surrendered. The British tried a small naval invasion of the Dutch, but they were soon pushed out with the tanks. With that done, it was time to begin and do what Napoleon could never do: the invasion of the British Isles and end Albion's treacherous reign of terror. With the overwhelming aerial superiority, we managed to cross the channel in multiple places, and with the British army scattered around their empire, their home guard could not put a proper defense against the might of our army and our mechanized troops. They were soon pushed to northern England before they surrendered entirely, and so the Italian and British empires were no more. Now that most wars were done, we could focus on the politics of this country, since we were too focused on the military thanks to shitty Germany and Italy. With the military taking over the country all those years ago, democracy has finally been suspended, even though that was kinda clear even back then. The world was a new one. Britain and Italy were dismantled, their colonial possessions were redistributed amongst our colonial states, and we finally retook Quebec. The military government, now no longer at odds with foreign powers, decided that the nation needed a restructuring, as the Third French Republic was finally dead. With the Republic gone, a new leader must be elected. We could pursue putting La Roque to form a new government. Maurras? I don't know how to pronounce it, I'm not bloody French. Could assume leadership and bring back the monarchy, or we could just make Pétain's place even stronger in the government, since he has served the country for the last few years. And yet, no one's surprised, Pétain will retain his place in power and remake France into his own image. Of course, since the emergency with all those wars is now over, we can finally lift martial law that was in place since 1936. Yikes. Talking about wars, shitty Caucasia was put in its place, and that was finally dealt with. A new constitution is needed for a new French state to implement its vision for the country. Oh, and remember Belgium? Well, I still wanted my Wallonia, and since the British are no longer around, don't mind me. Europe was finally safe from foreign influence, apart from ours, of course. But you know, those pesky Spaniards have been fighting since 1936, and I'm getting bored of overseeing what side will come out victorious, so let's just speed things up a bit. And with that, every threat to France has been dealt with, so we can truly focus on internal matters. In terms of the constitution, we could have a moderate constitution with a strong government in place, or have Pétain at the very top in a unitary constitution, and after leading France in 2 major wars, I think he knows what he's doing, so let him be at the top. Now it was time to deal with the Tsar Balkists, but we already have dealt with Germany proper, so what's the point of this? Yeah, it really messed up that I focused on dealing with Germany first than dealing with internal matters, but oh well, what can I say? It was the military that defended France, it was the military that saved France from foreign powers, it was the military that brought order to this country, as such most promoted as the saving grace of France. Now, with all the reforms in place, we can finally declare that the Revolution Nationale has been a success, with new values installed in the French people, that we can call our France the truly French state. And that was the end of today's video. I really hope you enjoyed France's wild ride, and remember that you can see the entire campaign time-lapse in the Declassified channel with minimal editing if anyone is interested. If you like this video and would like to see this type of videos in the future, remember to subscribe to the channel, as this greatly helps me out. This was Defectus, you are dismissed, soldier.